scissors, or should I just fold this? Welcome. Tonight we are hosting the Domino bake sale and Q&A.
We're just gonna try to fill you in on what's going on with the site. Mary Hapster's our first speaker, and she is from the Society for Industrial Archaeology.
I'm with the Roebling chapter, which is the New York metropolitan area chapter. I thought I would start with the family that started Domino Sugar. William and his brother Frederick Christian came here at the end of the 18th century, knowing the latest in sugar making. By 1805, only 5 years after William came to this country, they were able to buy land for their own refinery. So they were doing really well. Opened that refinery in Lower Manhattan in 1807, and by 1810 they were already expanding to an adjacent lot. So they were going great guns from the beginning. Their sons took over the business. By 1856, that plant was obsolete, and the sons had moved on to other things. William F., who is the second William, the son of the first, went into politics, and he actually served as mayor of New York for a number of years. The other brother, Frederick Jr., traveled the world for a while, kept his interest in sugar making, though everywhere he went, he checked on what the latest technology was. And when he came back, he was ready to go back into the business. And in 1856, he's the one who opened the plant in Williamsburg with one of his sons and another colleague. It was important to be on the waterfront for several reasons. They could bring the raw sugar cane in easily that way. They could ship sugar out. They also were using a lot of steam-powered equipment and needed an enormous amount of fuel. So it was a way to bring the fuel into the plant. And just a year later, they were making 300,000 pounds of sugar a day. And because they were using the latest technology, their sugar was pure white. And so between making more than anybody else was in Brooklyn and making pure white sugar, all the sugar before that was fairly brown and very expensive, they just knocked a lot of smaller refineries out of business that were further inland in Brooklyn then. The 1850s plant burned down in 1882, completely burned to the ground. When they rebuilt it, they decided it would be the world's largest, best, most advanced sugar refinery in the world, and it was. This was a vertically integrated company. They owned their own plantations in Cuba. They owned their own ships to bring the sugar cane here. They owned almost the entire Williamsburg waterfront. So when we get to the third generation of the Havemeyers, Henry O. Havemeyer, he was really the biggest of them all. He was never called Henry, though. He was always called Harry, or H.O. And he and his wife are the ones who started this collection of art after he'd made his pots and pots of money. But his father, Frederick Jr., did make him learn the business from the ground up. He wore coveralls, and he did every job in the refinery to learn the business from top to bottom. But he's the one who started the Sugar Trust. And this was a monopoly modeled on the Standard Oil monopoly. They combined 17 refineries across the country into one company and controlled all the prices. All the sugar in the country virtually by the beginning of the 20th century was controlled from Williamsburg. The trust was broken up later, but you know, that was how big this place was. It was the world's biggest sugar refinery, and by the early 20th century controlled over 90% of the sugar consumed in the United States. If you ever get to see the water side of the plant, at the base of that wonderful oval chimney worked into the brick is the name Havemeyers and Elder. The two families were partners in the company and then intermarried at several levels. One of Harry's brothers married an elder also. And in fact, Harry was married to Louise's aunt first and divorced her because of his drinking problem. She divorced him because of his drinking problem. Louise wouldn't marry him until he agreed never to touch another drop, and apparently he didn't. When the Havemeyers ceased to own the plant, Tate & Lyle was a British company that bought it in recent history. There was a major strike while they owned it. quite bitter. They just felt that it was not economical anymore to process sugar on the antiquated equipment. There is a lot of original equipment still in the plant. It was bought by Florida Crystals. They also decided that it was not economical to run the plant, but it was a somewhat friendlier closure. I was in there the day before it closed, and the cleaning guys were still polishing the glass on the doors, even though they knew the place was closing the next day. We walked up the stairs into the top of that, and there's this light coming in through these blue and white windows, and sugar sprinkle all over the floor, and these sifters and tubes that they use to direct the sugar into the different bins, and it was just like a fairyland, an industrial fairyland.
The site was bought a couple years ago by two developers. One's a big corporation called Community Preservation Corporation, and then there's another developer called Isaac Catan, who is pretty infamous for his projects. I don't want to be any more libelous than that, but you can Google him.
WPA is obviously trying to have this landmarked because of its cultural significance, and in the process of going around and talking to people about the landmarking, we've had some strange questions asked, and one of them has been over and over, well, if we landmark that, does it mean that we have to keep using it as manufacturing? And absolutely that's not the case. We support having it converted through adaptive reuse so that it is used for housing, and particularly affordable housing in this neighborhood is a huge need. The initial plans that came out were basically level the site and put up more shiny glass towers, and we felt that, we didn't want to see that happen.
It's not only the historic and cultural significance, but it's the architectural significance. They're really beautiful buildings, and they're also a complex. So we need to save more than one. It would be ideal if the Landmarks Commission would designate the buildings prior to the rezoning, or at least in concert with the rezoning. The city needs to hear from the community that these are important, that the preservation of these buildings are important, that the city needs to designate, and that there can be affordable housing and the preservation of the buildings.
It's harder to distribute, like, people who make products in beta are like, well, I only run beta, so I can't really show it to you. Start anytime soon. Whereas with this, you can buy it on the internet. But there's a high quality of it.